in addition to headlining your own shows, you're often asked by other artists like Little Feat and such to join them on stage. How does one develop the versatility to be both either a leader or a supporting musician?
I was a supporting musician first. I was a sideman first. I was always a keyboard player in a band. So I knew that role very well of learning what my responsibilities were as a keyboardist, how to interact with the band as a keyboardist, how does the keyboards interact with the guitars, with the drums, how to support a singer, whoever the leader is, how to support them, make sure everything you do in your role supports basically who's paying your bill. Because you want them to be as best they can. And
right.
That's the role of a sideman. And so my first venture as a band leader, it was a co-band leader with Mark Mullins and Mulebone, but really on my own was as Papa Gros Funk, putting that together. And that's when I started taking, looking how everybody else did it and what applied to me, and try to be the best band leader as I could, knowing the route that I took as a sideman. So, just understanding the role and then being versatile. Sideman has to be very versatile to play different styles of music.
Yeah.
And being in tune to the different artists and all the different artists, even within the same genre, different artists like different things, and being in tune, being able to adapt and change. And that's probably the best thing that sideman could be, is just versatile and be able to adapt and change. And so to play with the Little Feat or the Meters or the guys in the Radiators or Anders Osborne or Better Than Ezra, those are all different genres of American music that require different things and different roles. So being in tune with what their needs are. And
right, but the thing that intrigues me is that there are a lot of really good frontmen, front women out there who could not do the supporting thing. Like they don't have that skill set necessarily. For some, ego. But for some, it's, they're used to being the person who takes the lead. And at the same respect, there's a lot of great sidemen out there who wouldn't be able to lead a band, to be the front man. So, I'm fascinated by the fact that you can do both so easily.
Well, coming up as a sideman and knowing that role, I did make a conscious choice in starting Papa Gros Funk to become a band leader. And then because of the success and the need for having a band leader, we needed someone to make the phone calls. No one was going to make the phone calls. No one was going to book a gig, and no one was going to get the equipment to the gig. So I took that upon myself because that's what I wanted to succeed at.
Yeah.
And so just the desire of succeeding and also having control. When you're a sideman, you're not in control of your career. You're not in control of your schedule. You're dependent on other people. So artists are going to call you to work. And so you have to have great artists who keep work all the time, or many great artists who cover your calendar pretty well. And so I was a conscious decision to be in control and be independent, so I can plan my life and be able to perform the music that I write and want to play. That's the other task of it.
But then you also have to serve as this kind of master of ceremonies, And
that's one of the downsides of being a band leader. It's all the risk and you get all the headaches. And no one really talks about the headaches.
And that's the headache is one of the headaches is master of ceremonies duties.
You have to do it all. You have to make sure everything, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. Because it's your responsibility. And if you want to succeed, there's no better person to do it than yourself.
Yeah. And then how long did it take you, would you say, to get comfortable with that? Or to find your voice as, the upfront guy?
As a band leader, as a musician, I would say that's an artist, being my own artist. it's a work in progress. But being comfortable out front, being comfortable with the direction, it probably took, from the time Papa Gros Funk started, a good 10 years to really know what my sound is, what my music is, the direction I wanted to go.
Wow.
So when Papa Gros Funk ended and I started the new band as John Papa Gros, it was very clear the direction and path of the music that I was going to take. It wasn't a little of this, a little of that. It's just, this is what the music is. This is an extension of New Orleans funk and rock and roll that has preceded me. That's a part of me. I'm an extension of that, and that's the music that I'm going to do. And I'm going to channel that, and I will take that to my grave.
And then, along those lines, you've talked about, you are a New Orleans musician. You play New Orleans music, and you've described it as this gumbo, this eclectic mix of these multiple influences. And this might be a little difficult. What makes someone a New Orleans musician? And I'm wondering about that, if only because obviously it's not where you're from, because there's artists from New Orleans who don't play New Orleans music. And yet there's probably like cats in Chicago who are from Chicago, but who play kind of New Orleans music. So
they play kind of New Orleans music, but there's also a lot of people who have moved to New Orleans from other parts of the country or other parts of the world who have come to New Orleans to figure that answer to that question. And over time, they get it. But I think what really makes a New Orleans musician is the versatility. Again, we go back to the versatility, because New Orleans, of all the different styles it comes from, you have to have some kind of sense of the rhythms first and foremost. All American music comes from New Orleans. It comes from the African rhythms that came from the slaves in Congo Square. Then it was developed by Goshawk, mixing those rhythms with the European classical rhythms, music, and then then taken by Buddy Bolden, Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong to develop what became American jazz music. And then you take that jazz instrumentation, that street kind of sound that came from that area, and you apply the danceable shuffles of jazz, and you amp it up and excite it more, and then all of a sudden here comes Dave Bartholomew and Fats Domino defining what rock and roll is. And then Alan Toussaint takes that with Dr. John and the Meters, and they twist it and amp it up and becomes funk music. But because they also listen to other music that are outside of New Orleans and how those infiltrate our own understanding, that it becomes something new and unique. And for America, New Orleans is probably the most unique city in the United States. And it should be reflected in our food and in our music, and it is.
Yeah. And also it seems, in all the artists you've mentioned, and even yourself and the ones you've played with, the sound is so different to me. But yet it's still like, okay, I see how that fits in the New Orleans pantheon of musicians. And so diversity definitely seems a part of it. And it seems like it's a very elastic idea. There are other forms of music that are maybe not as stretchable, if that's the right word. It's like, okay, this is, country, this is Americana, this is, punk, where it's a little bit more straightforward. But with New Orleans, it's, it's this amorphous idea, but they're cool with, all right, let's push it out this way, let's push it out that way.
There's just so many ways to skin a cat. And New Orleans people like to do it different. And that becomes, it comes ingrained in the music, because even in the, just from the rhythms, everything is kind of based on a simple rhythmic, boom, 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 boom. But then there's ways to twist that, and there's other rhythms that can be superimposed on top of that. So, you take the African rhythms mixed with the Caribbean rhythms, And then, so if a guy's got a banjo, he's going to find a way to hit a note with those rhythms.
Yeah.
And find a way. And then if a guy's got a tuba, he's going to find a way to come into that mix. And then if another guy's got a trumpet or a clarinet, he can play melodies on top of these rhythms. And then, 100 years go by and it gets twisted and turned into what we have right now. I mean, and why it's the first form of American music, why they call it jazz, is because of the improvisation that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so unique about not only New Orleans jazz, but also New Orleans funk music is that we not only improvise melodically, melodies or harmonies, the chords, we also improvise rhythms.
Mm.
And so rhythmically, New Orleans funk music, it's very complex, although harmonically it can be, and most of the time is very simplistic. But because of the complexity of the rhythms and that the way that the rhythms can be improvised, turned upside down, twisted inside out, that's what makes it special. And it's no different if you walk into somebody's house in New Orleans and someone tells you, hey, how you doing? Or you go to another person's house and say, where you at, darling? Or you go to another person's house and they say,
What's up, dog?
yeah, what's up? There's many different ways there is to say hello in New Orleans. That's just scratches the surface of the many different ways we can attack that simple boom, 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 boom. And that's really what makes it unique. And I think a lot of the other forms and genres of New Orleans, of American music, rock and roll, country, they're a lot more rigid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In their rhythms and their ability to blend and improvise. It's more set on a set course of what it is, and it's the same way every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's so many great New Orleans standards from When the Saints Go Marching In to Hey Pocky Way, but it depending on what day of the week it is, what time of the day, and who's playing it, it could be completely different every time you hear it, even from the same musician. Mm-hmm. But I'll play those songs completely different than how Kermit Ruffins would play it, or how George Porter would play it, or how, like Dr. John would play him, or Alan Toussaint would play him. But no matter who's playing it, it's still alive and breathing because it's new to the moment. Mm-hmm. And you don't get that if you're playing Journey's Don't Stop Believin', or you're playing, a Beatles hit. It's not the same way. It's very different how it is interpreted daily. It's an alive and it's breathing because our culture is unique and it's alive and breathing every day.
Mm. Yeah, no, and a perfect example being last time you came through Raleigh, you played Iko Iko as part of your set, and I've heard that done by lots of different musicians, again, mainly from New Orleans, but you guys all do it in a different way.
Right.
The essence, the spirit is still there.
And that's what makes it alive and breathing. The spirit of it is always there, no matter how it gets twisted and turned.
Yeah. Now, for a lot of musicians, though, improvisation, experimentation can be scary. It's because you got to have some confidence in what you're doing. How long did it take you before you became comfortable enough to say, all right, let's see how I can put my own personal spin on this?
I was petrified with improvisation because improvisation to me is like you're supposed to be grabbing music out of the air, notes and rhythms out of the air, and you're supposed to make music with it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, what are the notes? What are the rhythms? What does that mean? Mm-hmm. And I came from a musical background that didn't teach that and didn't support that. So really, I didn't get very comfortable with it until I started playing with George Porter, who pretty much lives and breathes as an improviser. Mm-hmm. And so, I'd done when I at school at Loyola in New Orleans, I was I was in the jazz program and took lessons with Ellis Marsalis, but I had all these other great musicians around that were studying. And I would just kind of watch their process and figure it out, and we just realized, you have to have a foundation of music to which to reach and grab from. George Porter calls it, you have to have tools in your belt if you're going to go to work.
I like that.
So when you're improvising, you have to have, the more tools you have, the more types of situations you can handle as an improviser. And so,
But that's cool because there's a great book by Stephen King, nonfiction, that he wrote about writing. It's called On Writing, and one of the analogies he has in there was, I think it was an uncle who when he was a little boy, he was going to fix a fence with his uncle, and really they just needed a hammer and stuff, but. And so he asked him, he's like, why do we lug the whole toolbox here? And he said, you always bring the full toolbox because you never know what you're going to need. And for Stephen King, he felt that was the same with writing. You always bring everything. Maybe you'll only need the screwdriver,
right.
But you always bring everything. And so you're saying essentially the same thing as professional musicians. You always make sure you have a full toolbox.
Full toolbox, a clear mind, and big ears.
Mm-hmm.
And then that allows you to communicate with other musicians. And the other part about being an improviser in New Orleans and learning about it, because I was pretty late before I was comfortable, there is a great tradition in New Orleans where the older musicians let the younger musicians play with them. You go sit in, there's places to sit in, or just like, hey, come on up. We're gonna, it could be a high school kid, just come on up. Come play and let them hang out. Let them experience to be a part of masters doing their work, but also kind of like, all right, kid, we're gonna throw you into the fire and see what you got, and then if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. But maybe we won't talk about it. You just come back next week.
All right.
And so that's a great thing about how New Orleans musicians, really help the younger guys and girls come up.
Well, and because I was wondering, because you've had some amazing mentors in your life in the New Orleans music scene. How much of that was you seeking them out, and how much of it was just serendipity that you guys met and connected?
I think it was all serendipity. I met George Porter many times before he had called me to audition for his band. But once I got into his band, just because he's George Porter, then all of a sudden you become a part or have access to integrate with the legends that built the music that I play. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why I play that music, because I had that interaction, and you learn what a Mardi Gras Indian beat is when you can sit there and talk with Big Chief Monk Boudreaux, and you realize it's not just boom, 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 boom. There's a whole other deep counterculture that goes back hundreds of years, mm-hmm. that's been passed down through Monk, and then you experience that and you realize, well, what we're doing here is it's pretty important. Or playing with a guy like Snooks Eaglin, who was first discovered as a solo blind acoustic blues musician when he was a teenager, but then went on to play in the first band with Toussaint, and he was on Professor Longhair's records, groundbreaking records of the early 70s. He was on the first Wild Magnolias Mardi Gras Indian records, and then just one of our greatest resources of New Orleans history. And getting to meet him and play him, and it's as much talking and learning about them as people, mm-hmm. where they come from, as it is to be on stage and seeing how they operate and how they've mastered the music. Because we all, when we perform, you're giving of yourself, and as a side musician, maybe there's a side musician aspect of it. The side musician, you're trying to give to the artist. The artist is also given to you, and there's some kind of bond that happens there, mm-hmm. That the audience always picks up on. So that's kind of a neat thing that way, as far as figuring it out. Yeah,
and then it makes me think, like every time we talk, you always have things in conversation that illustrates your depth of knowledge of the history of this music, and so it's interesting because you're making new music, you're trying to push, but you've always got this fantastic encyclopedic knowledge of where it all came from. And you know,
Well, my dad plays New Orleans piano. And he grew up in the '50s and played in the rock and roll scene when it was just blossoming. He went to college outside of New Orleans and got out of it. But as a kid, I always heard all the Fats Domino stuff, all the Huey Piano Smith songs. He would either play them on piano or we'd have records going. You go to aunts' parties or cousins' houses and they'd be playing these records. You hear this music and then you see on TV, Louis Armstrong or Pete Fountain's going to be on the Johnny Carson show or some television show. Or I remember when Louis Armstrong was on Hello Dolly on TV. You got to see it on TV. I mean, that was a big deal to my parents, to my aunts and uncles. I didn't know anything about the history of New Orleans music. I just knew it was important to them. And so when I started diving in as a young adult, starting putting those connections of growing up with these are important things for my family. Why is it? And why do I love this music so much? I just didn't know it. Like, why do I love Fats Domino music? Well, it makes me happy. That's, and you look around, it makes everybody happy, but I can put that music together in my memories of family parties and family gatherings. And so it's like, that's a happy thing. And it's like, okay, well, I can play it and I can play it fairly well. So it helps me achieve one of my biggest goals in life is just to make people happy. Just like Louis did. And so, I mean, like Fats did, and Louis Armstrong was the same way. So, and then as I get older, it's more important for me to connect the dots to figure out how I got to where I am today. And it wasn't any kind of, I guess there's a path. You never choose your path.
Yeah.
Path chooses you, and like just trying to figure that out, how I got on this path and why I'm here, and all the pieces to the puzzle that are responsible for it. Because, I mean, it's my path, and I do a lot to try to earn my keep on it. But I don't feel like I'm very responsible for the direction of it. I just kind of get on board and follow it where it leads me. I don't feel like I'm really pulling the cart here.
Yeah. So it's not about trying to force things. It's just kind of, my wife has a saying, follow the green lights. It sounds like it's kind of like that.
Yeah, path of least resistance is pretty good for me.
Yeah.
When you see green means go, it's you do it. But also, it's as a sideman and the versatility goes back to that. When you're a sideman and you're trying to be versatile, I learned pretty early on that I'm versatile, but there's a lot of other guys that are much better covering a lot of bases than I am. And so I just started honing into the parts of it that I did really well, and the types of music and the genres that I really did well in. And those are actually the ones that I really love to listen to as well. So I started to say, no, I'm not going to be a modern jazz guy. I just don't do that as good as other people. I don't understand it as well. I love it, but it's just not me. My days of playing French horn, I love French horn. I love playing in orchestra. I love listening to symphonies and French horn music. But it's like something I was not able to just keep up on a day-to-day business. I didn't have that follow-through, so I chose a different path, or the path chose me, Go to the path of least resistance. Go to where things are working better for you. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah, no, I'd say it's going really well in that sense. And then getting back to the mentors that you've had, we have lost some of those people in recent years, mentors, friends of yours, be it Alan Toussaint, Dr. John, Art Neville most recently. Besides the sorrow that comes with that, how does that affect your playing, your songwriting?
I don't know life without Alan, Art, or Dr. John. Because no matter what I've done in my career, they were always at the top. And their music was always the benchmark. So everything that I did, I tried to make sure if they were to hear it, they would be really proud and say, hey kid, you're doing all right. Keep at it. And luckily enough, I got to do enough to be friends, some better than others, and got to actually play with and work on music together to get the feedback from those three that like, yeah, you're on the right path, you belong here, you do it. And so with them now gone, it's kind of like, I just feel like they're on my shoulder in the back somewhere just saying, all right, kid, keep it up. Keep it up, you got it, keep it up, don't let us down. And I don't think they would ever say don't let us down, but that's coming from me. Like, I just don't want to let them down because they laid out such a formidable blueprint of how to succeed and be honest and truthful in an individual, being a New Orleans musician. And they were able to take that to the world. You know.
And then just to clarify, so what do you mean about being an individual?
Well, we all are New Orleans musicians. But Art came from the rock and roll piano, Fats Domino. He loved Fats Domino. He came from that school of piano playing, but then when he heard Bill Doggett and he heard Booker T play the organ, he switched to organ. And when he switched to organ, all of a sudden, New Orleans funk music was born. And of course, you know, the other members of the Meters and Alan, they were all there together. And Art was probably by far, wrote the least amount of songs. But he was always the central force around so much of it. As far as being his voice or his sense of rhythm. He was such a strong personality that he knew how the spaces worked and what defined New Orleans funk music. And that's a very individual thing. When we call him Papa Funk, he's the guy that started New Orleans funk music. It was his vision, and I've heard Leo say this, the Meters would not have happened without Art Neville. Art Neville had the gig on Bourbon Street, and he hired those guys to do his gig. Of course, now they all contributed, and it's the sum of the four parts. But the central force of Art Neville is just phenomenal. So you take that, and you take Dr. John with his you know, he just has the whole understanding of New Orleans music from Louis Gottschalk, the classical composer pianist, Jelly Roll Morton, Fats Domino, Toots Washington, like all the great piano players, James Booker, Professor Longhair. And then he also understood all the jazz standards. So he really knew how the New Orleans rhythms mixed with the jazz mixed, and then when Art came around with the funk, he understood all of it. How on such a wide level. And so his take on it, especially from the Gree angle, which is a whole different take. You know, he developed this whole Gree New Orleans music with the, you know, which, you know, he's a guy named Mac Rebenek, changes his whole career and persona to Dr. John.
Yeah. Based
on this Gree guy and this whole other form of voodoo, New Orleans voodoo music. I mean, that's just, it mixes with all of the New Orleans Indians, with the jazz. It's all kind of conglomerate together. How he completely made an individual style of New Orleans music. And then you have like Alan Toussaint, who was a great analyzer. He could analyze and knew what everything was about, from the lyrical standpoint, the words of a song, to the chords that were being used, to what the guitar player was doing, the bass drum, the piano. Just he understood how all the pieces to the puzzle fit, so that when he wrote a song, he heard the whole picture in his head. So when he gets to work with Dr. John or Art Neville, he sees what they're about, and he understands what they're about, and then the three of them really is just the pinnacle of what New Orleans music, rock and roll, funk music is all about in their work that they did together, because Alan understood it all. And being Alan, what makes him so special as an individual, I really want to say from the time Fats Domino's hits started winding down in the early 60s, all New Orleans music came from, or had the hand of Alan Toussaint on it from the early 1960s of Irma Thomas, Ernie Cado, Benny Spellman, goes through the pre-meter stuff with Lee Dorsey, who had all of his big hits, then all the meter stuff, and then the Dr. John stuff. All those records. He had his hands on all of that stuff besides writing his own songs, doing his own career. But then because he was so great, his own great way to say it, there's a lot of other factors that involve business aspects, but that's how he became to write horns and arrange for the band. Little Feat, Paul McCartney, Patti LaBelle, Robert Palmer. You know, it's just like,
Yeah.
then it just gets much bigger than New Orleans, but it's all because of his understanding of the pieces to the puzzle, and that's what makes him so individual. It's like the three of those guys together as individuals shaped so much of what the world knows as New Orleans music. And that's our blueprint. So as long as I just follow that and find my own way to add to it, and they can be on my shoulders going, all right, kid, that'll do. That'll be fun.